Hello and welcome to Emmy and Zoe's podcast. This series is economic issues and this podcast today is called Cost of Living. It's the 11th of November 2022.
It is indeed.
I feel like for this podcast we've had to do a lot of research because we haven't really been told about it. It's not like a spoken thing that's really happened as we've grown up.
Yeah, especially not for teenagers and children as such. It's not taught in schools or anything. So.
Yeah, like I haven't really heard about it a lot. I mean, I think recently it's come up in the news, which is good because then we've got to know a bit more about it. But I think recently it's come up in the news is because the war, and obviously we have now officially left the EU, so that means we buying, selling and transporting goods is a little bit difficult now, and it's a bit more expensive, so therefore everything has gone up because we haven't been able to get country discounts, I guess, or we haven't been able to sell or buy from certain countries in the European Union.
Yeah, because since the war with Russia and Ukraine, obviously since we're helping Ukraine out, Russia's not providing us with oil anymore. Or if they are, it's not much and it's a lot more expensive. So us as a country are having to put up our prices because it's harder to get, so there's less of it. So that means everyone's going to have to pay more for it. So there has been a very significant increase in the price of oil.
Yeah, for example, costs have gone up 2.8% this year alone.
Yeah, and food prices just in October have risen by 11.6%, and that's on top of September where it rose 10.6%.
Oh, wow.
So food prices have gone up massively.
I mean, I also saw this stat which was UK trading, and export was 0.7 and import was 3.9, and that number on its own seems like a small amount. But when you're getting billions of pounds mixed into that, it's huge.
That's a big proportion. Yeah, I think that people are really being affected by this a lot more than it is being covered in the news a lot. But I don't think people feel kind of betrayed by the government almost, because it was the government's it wasn't their decision. They did a vote, but the government did ultimately leave the EU. They're siding with Ukraine, which is probably the correct side to choose.
Yes.
But it has caused some problems for our country, and maybe people are thinking that they should be putting our country first.
And I think it's about obviously we've started discussing the problems, and I think we also need to discuss what we can make better and what we can do for ourselves or for our community so we can live a little bit cheaper. Maybe we can have heating on, maybe there's a different way we can do it, for example solar panels, food banks, giving, also saving quite a lot because it might get more. You never know what's going to happen. I think that's one of the key issues is you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, when the market is as unstable as it is at the moment, I think that saving is something that everyone has to do. But the thing is with food banks, lots of people did donate to food banks and they were living perfectly content lives, maybe making the average amount a family would make. But now that's not enough.
Yes.
So the food banks won't be given as much food because people can barely buy food for themselves. So that then means that people who were already poor and are now poorer don't have food in the food banks, and more people will be needing food banks, and it's kind of like a never-ending vicious cycle almost.
And I think it's how do we live cheaper without fully changing our lives, because I feel like I want to keep my life the same.
Yeah.
100%. I'm hands down, I will say the truth. I want to keep my life the same. I want everything to be the same.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's not going to happen.
Can't afford it.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. My life is not going to be rainbows and butterflies all the time. We are going to need to actually change something, do something, and do it for the best. And that is going to have to be a long-term thing. For example, for us, cost of living, fuel. We're going to learn to drive soon.
Yeah.
That's going to be a lot more expensive than like usual.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Lessons, 50 quid. Then on top of that, you've got the car. Then on top of that, you've got the fuel. And the fuel is probably the main problem because we're paying 100 for a tank.
Yeah.
And like before this, 10, 15 years ago?
It was like 50 for like a full tank.
Yeah, 50 for a full tank. And that's literally double.
Yeah.
And so it's how do you, as a kid who's doing minimum wage, pay for all of this?
You can't.
And this is the key problem.
And that's the thing, because I read some stories of like adults even who are struggling to, on a full job. There's a woman called Zoe Dunn who's 34 years old, and she has 3 kids. She works a full job. She has 3 kids, but she still works like a full job. And she's having to have help from her mother to pay for stuff, because having one income isn't enough to provide for 3 kids, which is a normal amount. It's not like she has 50 kids to provide for. She has 3 kids, young children, and they're having to buy secondhand clothes because they can't afford clothes anymore. They're having to limit the amount of toiletries they're using, and that's just so that they can afford food. On top of that, there's petrol to drop her kids to wherever she needs to be. There's clubs, like out of school stuff, in school stuff. Like, there's a lot of stuff other than food that people need to buy.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like something we haven't talked about yet is not only was that like moving back into her mum's house.
Yeah.
Like, obviously she's grown up, she's moved out, she's got her own, well, she had her own house, her own flat, whatever, and she's built a family for herself, she's built a life for herself. Not only has that now been a physical step back because she's moved back, she's reversed basically what she's all built her life around, it's an emotional setback because she's now
her
like...
Her independence has been taken because she can't afford it.
Yeah, her independence has been taken, maybe her confidence has been taken, the struggles, they've all...
Yeah.
It's been amplified.
Yes. And, like, there's a lot of people who can't find jobs, who are obviously going to be struggling a lot. And there's a man called Michael Wood, who's 50 years old. So lots of his friends may be thinking about retiring, or have retired.
Yes. Depending
on their job. And he is still working, but he's saying that he's working and he is finding it hard. So he said that he feels sorry for the people who aren't working because he can barely afford to live and he has a full-time job, and he thinks that the government are only thinking about themselves and not the average person on the street.
I think it's a really difficult topic to talk about, obviously, because we are not the government, so we don't have both sides of the story. I think personally the government are trying, but they could try more.
Yeah,
there is definitely leeways that they have not gotten down yet.
Yeah, the government has released a statement that said that they are planning to hand out £324 to millions of families to help with like energy and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, when prices have increased 11%, over 11% just this month, that's not going to go very far.
Exactly, and especially because I think it's £150 for council estates, and even that doesn't do it.
Yeah. So because of the cost of living, 1.7 million households could be pushed into homelessness this winter.
Yeah, and I feel like that is a huge problem, and I feel like we need to go into depth with that, like so much more. And that is what we're going to be doing for our next podcast. So thank you for listening. That was Emmy and Zoe doing cost of living.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome. This is Zoe and Emmy's podcast, and we are doing homelessness today. It's the 11th of November 2022.
It is.
Yeah. So we did touch on homelessness a little bit
right at the end
when we were talking about cost of living.
We both think that this is definitely something that we need to go into a lot more detail about.
Yes, we thought we'd do one literally individually on homelessness because there is a lot going on. Like, for example, 1 out of 5 teenagers become homeless.
Yeah, and that's a lot.
And there's about 1,853 homeless people in Reading alone, and it's a town.
It's a town. It's not even a major city like London. And even for a place like London, that is a lot of homeless people. So for Reading to have that many homeless people when it's a town that's a lot of people. That's a big percentage of the population.
Exactly. And I think we should talk about what society has made homelessness like.
Yes.
I think views on homelessness is negative.
They're really bad.
You're not going to go up to someone and you're not going to go up to a homeless person. You're going to sit down and be like, right, let's have a chat.
Yeah, what's going on?
Exactly. Because we have grown up as you don't make eye contact, you walk.
You don't give money.
Exactly, don't give money. That is the key thing I think we've always been told. And that is 100% understandable.
Yeah.
But it's the fact is, we don't give money because we think it's going to go towards drugs because society has said homeless people are drug addicts.
Yeah.
And there is some truth behind that because obviously addiction, a stereotype is not going to be made by lies.
Is the number one cause of homelessness.
But also, how has that addiction happened? Maybe because you can't afford rent. Maybe because you've been kicked out. Maybe because you just can't do it anymore. Like, so much can evolve around being addicted to something, and I feel like that is something that we need to go more into.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many causes for homelessness. Like, whether it be, maybe it is addiction, maybe that is a mistake they've made and now they're having to live with that mistake.
Yeah, like, deal with it.
Yeah, but housing is so expensive at the moment.
Yes.
There's poverty is growing massively, and there's just things like family issues.
Yes.
If a teenager, there's so much child poverty. I mean, 1 out of 5 teenagers become homeless, which is so much. If a child our age, for example, if a 15, 16-year-old kid gets kicked out of their home, what are they going to do?
Yeah. They've got nothing to help them, no funding, no money at all, no experience.
Yeah.
They've not been taught anything, and that is a problem.
Yeah, a minimum wage job isn't going to get them a house.
That's not going to solve you anything, yeah. And I think if we go back to talking about finding housing and stuff, I think we should talk a little bit more about like council housing, because, for example, it takes 8 months to really be on the main list, and that's 8 months of homelessness. And for example, homeless people are 17 times more likely to be victims of abuse and violence from public people walking by, and I just think that's gross.
Just because they're living on the streets, because they can't afford housing.
Exactly, and that is, the government are trying to do something about it, but people who are causing the abuse are doing nothing.
Yeah, the public don't really care, and the government is trying to help. I mean, obviously there's food banks.
And there's a problem with money, because a homeless person costs £40,000 a year for the government.
Yes.
And that's a lot of money, especially because I mentioned there was thousands.
Yeah, there's 1,853, just repeat that statistic.
In Reading alone.
In Reading alone.
Yeah, and there's about 8,236. And that's probably gone up by the time I've researched that before.
Yeah, just in the UK.
And I think if I go back, it's like there's a physical problem here. And it's very clear. And it's, what do we do about that? Because obviously we've got facilities that we can host people in. Some people can take people off the street, and that's lovely, but not everyone can.
Yeah.
Not everyone can afford it, and they're just getting by. And it's, so how can we help? By maybe like doing small things, like giving money, giving clothes, giving food, just things like that. And then also having a chat with them, maybe not just ignoring them completely, because I feel like being one of the main causes for homelessness as well is being mentally ill.
Yes.
And being homeless because you're mentally ill is not going to help you whatsoever.
It's going to make things worse.
Yeah, and
because
the suicide rates are so high.
Homeless people are 9 times more likely to take their own life.
And I just think that's crazy. For example, the average age for a homeless man is 46 and 42 for a woman.
Yeah.
That's not even half. That's not even half for 100 years. And that's like an average.
Yeah. I mean, having 9 times more likely, that's a lot.
Yes.
That's a lot more chance. And if you think about the suicide rates as it is, having a big majority of those people being homeless that's not good. There needs to be something to help that, but the support system just isn't strong enough. And I don't think it can get that strong because of how many people there are.
Yeah, and I think something that we should, from a young age, be taught is having a kind of like a net.
Yes.
So right now, if I was living in a flat on my own and I lost my job, I can't afford the rent, so what's going to be my net? Maybe it should be my savings. Maybe I should have the government like helping me with some scheme or something. Maybe I should have a family like loom to help me, but I don't have anything, so how do I create that?
Yeah.
Or what can I do so I understand the importance of having something like that?
Yeah. But another thing is that we're not taught any of that at school. And none of what you were taught just talking about, we know what to do. We don't know how to get in contact with people if we need help. We don't know where to find a food bank, where to find like a homeless shelter. We don't know how to do that because we're just kind of brought up in school assuming that we're going to have a job and then our lives are going to go perfect and we're going to get married and have kids, but that's not how your life may work out.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think one of the main things that we want to take away from this is like changing society's views on homeless people.
Yes.
And obviously you're not going to be like, right, how many people are in England? Like 7 million? You're not going to be like, right, 7 million people, listen up, please. Homeless people are not bad. They're such good people. Just be nice to them, please.
Yeah,
like, you can't say that to people, can you? And obviously, there's going to be homeless people, it might be their fault. Like, some of them, like, I'm not going to say all of them, but some of them, it might be their fault. But some of them, it's just happened, and you can't get out of it. And I think the problem is, once you're in, you can't get out.
Yeah, because
unless help.
Lots of people say like, oh, well, it's their problem, they haven't got a job. But to apply for a job, you need an address, you need a telephone number, you need to look presentable for an interview. And if you're homeless, you're not going to have an address to write down, you're not going to have access to showers or perfume or clean clothes.
And like things that they can, like if they can get that, how are they going to get that? They need to ask for help. And why would they ask for help when everyone who walks past them doesn't look at them or spits on them or shouts at them?
Yeah. It's a problem that society has created because we weren't raised 1 billion years ago thinking in the future when homeless people are around, they're all going to be horrible people.
Yeah.
It's just something that people have kind of assumed, and it's a bad assumption.
Yeah, and I've also just been thinking like there's a giving part, I think. So for example, like if a homeless person is sat and they've got like a cup in front of them or something, they're not getting anything. I'm sorry, but that is not happening. No one's going to give money to them, are they? But if they have a guitar and there's a cup in front of them and they're playing, they are giving music to the public and the public are paying them back. And I guarantee you they'll get more money doing that than they will doing nothing. And so it's the giving part. The public always want something, and when they don't get given something, they're not going to give back, are they?
Exactly.
But when they get given something, they'll do something back. People are selfish, and this is the problem with homelessness.
Yeah, but there's so many people that are rich and can afford to they could probably afford to pay for someone to have a house.
Yeah.
But they're 100%. Not going to because it's not their issue, which is something we need to talk about.
Yeah, we definitely need to go into more depth with that. And I think we're going to do that for our next podcast, yeah?
Yep.
So thank you for listening. That was Emmy and Zoe's podcast, and that was on homelessness, and that is the 11th of November 2022.
It is indeed.
Thank you for listening.
That many.
Yeah, definitely.
But in this past year, 12 months ago, since then, there's 24 more billionaires.
And that's just crazy.
In 12 months, 24 more people have become billionaires. Yeah. And it would take 400 years of an average household to reach that 1% of people that are billionaires.
And I think the reason you said 100 years, 400 years.
400, yeah.
Yeah, is the reason you're rich is not because of yourself.
No.
That is the main reason, is not because of yourself. The main reason is because your family is rich. If your family is rich, they'll pay for higher education. Therefore, you get a higher paying job. Therefore, you're rich, etc., etc. It's a cycle. The same with public education, lower paid job, lower paid income, round and round. There obviously are going to be exceptions. There's exceptions to every single rule on the planet.
Exactly.
But that's the majority. And how do you change it? How do you give everyone the same opportunity without making it all about money?
You can't.
And how do you keep that message across without being like, oh, so basically your life is going to revolve around to nothing?
Exactly. Like, obviously there's exceptions. Some people may be amazingly talented at something and the world just falls right for them and they earn loads of money and they live a lifestyle.
And that will happen, yeah.
Yeah, that happens. But lots of the time it doesn't, and to be realistic, most likely it won't. And then if you've gone to a private school and you've paid thousands and thousands a year to go to private school, then you're going to be taught how to be an employer. You're going to be taught how to run a business. When if you go to just a normal state school, you're going to be taught how to be the employee. And you're going to be taught how to fit into the nice little box that they've made for you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be taught how to earn money.
Yeah, and I think how do we put those two extremely different ways of teaching together?
Yeah.
Or how do we move all to one, or how do we move all to the other, or how do we scrap it both and then do a new way of teaching? And if so, what is it? And so I think there is so many issues with this topic, but there is no answers, or very little answers even then.
Very little answers, yeah. I mean, big companies make millions and billions of profit every year. And
what, like fuel?
Yeah. So for example, petrol supplies have risen and they've made £150 billion of profit just this year, whilst people are struggling to pay for petrol, so they can't even use their car.
And that's just crazy, because how are you, I'm not going to say no, they're not giving any money to everyone, but how have you got that much money and still people are having a bad time?
I know.
You might be helping loads of people, but not everyone is. And I wouldn't say, oh yeah, because you're having people but no one else is, you're not going to make a big difference. I'm just saying no one else is, so it's not going to make a big ass difference.
I mean, if you think about it, my parents, for example, they just work normal lives, earn a normal amount of money. They'd have to work for 400 years to earn the same amount of money that the billionaires at the moment have. And my parents can still give to charity. They still are in a financial stability where they can give to charity.
Yeah.
But billionaires could give more, and they're not.
Yeah, and why are they not? That's the thing.
Because they don't see it as their problem.
And I think, how do you... It's not, to be honest, it's not their problem.
No.
But how do you tell them that maybe it is a good idea?
Yeah.
Because it's not your problem, don't make it someone else's problem.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the people that are in the worst situation in their lives give the most.
Exactly.
Because they've been in that situation before.
And how do you put that mindset on for everyone else?
I think if the rich have had everything handed to them, then they don't feel like they need to give down because they've never been in that scenario where they feel they need money.
And if you've ever actually seen is for example, you were saying celebrities, yeah? Some celebrities who have come from the worst backgrounds they're never the billionaires because they give.
Yes.
And the ones who have come from a good background, like lawyer mum, doctor dad, like they're billionaires.
Yeah.
And they don't give as much, or they don't give at all. And it's just interesting to see who does it and why.
Yeah, because you'd probably find that most of the homeless people that are on the streets at the moment, they'd be quite happy with just living a normal, content life. They don't want to be billionaires. They just want enough money to have a house and eat food.
So, for example, if I'm like, here you go, here's $1 million, what are you going to do?
I'd probably buy a car, give some to my mum, give some to charity, and then...
And why would you give it? Because you want to have someone else to have that feeling.
Yes.
And you want someone else to experience that, and that is why you give. And so you need to get to the point where you have been given. And rich people don't get given anything because they're already rich.
Yeah, and they just keep earning and earning.
And so how do you break that cycle, and how do you get out of that cycle?
You can't without them having to lose everything, and they're never going to lose anything because wealth is power.
And how do we solve that? We don't know.
You can't, that's the problem. And there's nothing on it. There's no news articles on it or anything.
It's because no one knows. It's a mystery.
We were researching this and there was nothing on it.
But yeah, thank you for listening. That was our podcast on The Richer Gets Richer. It's the 11th of November 2022. And this is Zoe and Emmy. Thank you.
Thank you.